Number 9, to discussion to update the council on events related to the regulation of adult entertainment in public spaces with possible action by council to give direction to city staff, presented by our city manager, Mr. Mike Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. And I will tell you that as a city staff member, we always want to be the one that everybody showed up for until we're the one that everybody showed up for. So my opinion has changed about that. But this is obviously a topic that has been ongoing for quite some time. It's taken very seriously by the city council, city staff, and obviously by the people who have chosen to join us tonight and at other meetings as well. But wanted to start out rather quickly just kind of by going over a recap of the things that have happened up to this point. Of course, we know that on September 10th, there was Bartlesville Pride celebration, and at that Pride celebration, they closed it out by having a drag show. That drag show then resulted in a petition that was created online that was presented to the council on October 3rd. At that night, city staff informed the council that the city attorney would then give an update, essentially a legal brief, to the council at its next meeting. Mr. Kane did that on November 7th. December was our off meeting when the new council is seated, and we have a lot of procedural things, so we didn't talk about it then. However, at that November 7th meeting, the city council did ask the Park Board and the Bartlesville Community Center Trust Authority to make recommendations, to review this issue and make any recommendations they felt were appropriate. And then during the month of December primarily, but I believe actually some in November as well, city staff met with representatives of both the petitioners and Oklahomans for Equality Bartlesville. So that's just a quick recap. To go into it in a little more detail, September 10th, there was, I believe it was the 5th annual Pride. So this was the 5th year that the Pride celebration had been held in Bartlesville. It was the 2nd year that it had been held at Unity Square, and it was actually the 2nd year for the drag show as well. I know we've had some discussions about that, but this was not the 1st year for the drag show. It had occurred actually the prior year as well. So the drag show did sort of catch fire on social media, and it drew protesters, not just from Bartlesville, but from outlying areas as well. And then ultimately that resulted in the petition. So on October 3rd, the city council was presented with a petition. We probably need to define this a little bit better. This was a petition from change.org, which is a really cool website that you can go to if you want to get people to sign up, whether they believe they agree with something or not. It is important, however, that we differentiate. This is not a legal petition. The city council has not been presented with something that requires action or that calls for a vote or something of that nature. So the petition did, at that time, had over 2,000 signatures. Now it's actually probably closer to 3,000. Those are unverified signatures. It's obvious that some of them come from areas outside of Bartlesville. However, as witnessed by this crowd, there is obviously intense local interest in this. So that really is kind of the key that started this rolling and has really brought us to tonight. But the title of the petition was another thing that I think we should pay attention to. We all know the petition didn't mention the drag show, by the way, but we do know that was the event that triggered this. But the title of the petition and the action that was actually asked for was to really prohibit adult-oriented entertainment in a public space. And if you read further into it, it talked about the event that happened at Tower Center without naming it. And it asked the council to look at that to see if there was anything illegal. And if it was not illegal, for the council to consider regulating adult entertainment in public spaces. So at that night, as we said, we had lengthy comments. I think that night there was probably over an hour of public input from citizens on both sides. And then the council was informed that night that the city attorney would be preparing a legal brief, which he spent 30 days doing and barely had enough time to do it, but he presented an excellent legal brief on November 7th. And it is included in your packet. You can certainly review it at your leisure. I've chosen really just to kind of focus on his conclusion. And in his conclusion, he was talking about the types of regulation that could be used if the council had desired to regulate adult entertainment in public places. And there was two paths you could take. The first path was essentially a content-neutral type of regulation. And you'll see that I've highlighted the most relevant parts of this where we could enact reasonable restrictions upon adult entertainment so long as those restrictions are content neutral and narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest. There's more to it that you can read up there, but that was the parts that I thought were most important. Then he also addressed the fact that the city may also restrict adult entertainment which is deemed obscene. So we'll talk a little bit more about those later, but those were really the key takeaways from Mr. Kane's briefing. There was discussions about the Supreme Court. There was discussions about the Miller test, which deals with community standards, which we all know we don't get to determine what those are. That's something that either a judge or a jury would determine for us if we were sued. So that brought us up through the boards and committees, which I presented again a memo that you have in your packet to the park board asking them to consider this matter. I will tell you that they were somewhat concerned. They felt like they were being asked to offer an opinion on something that was very legalistic. Once we narrowed that down to say, no, do you believe it's necessary? Are you aware of anything other than this one event that caused these concerns? And the answer really was no. Both groups were not aware of anything outside of this one particular event, and ultimately neither of them really supported this. Now, the community center actually took official action. I should note, and Vice Mayor Curd was there, that the park board, we really only had the one discussion, and we never came back to them for action. But the members that were there, it was clear that the majority of the members did not support it. So that's why I didn't say that they took action to oppose it. They didn't. We simply had a discussion, and it was clear that they didn't support this. So that was where we left those. So that's being reported back to the council based on your request at your November meeting. Staff meetings. This really took up a majority of the time on this matter from November to December. So if anybody thinks nothing happened, I assure you it's not the case. There were a number of meetings. City staff met with representatives of both the petitioners and OKEQ. I'll keep it brief. There's greater detail in your packet, but the meetings early on were very promising. We had had kind of established a voluntary agreement between the two groups. It was an informal agreement. OKEQ had agreed to modify their event in certain manners, and the petitioners had agreed to accept that. But then as we began to get into the details of how that would work, the representative from the petitioners did not feel that they had the authority or perhaps even the support of the other petitioners, and therefore withdrew from the discussion. Once it became a one-sided discussion, OKEQ had a board meeting, and they also withdrew. So unfortunately, I don't have an agreement to present to you tonight. We've discussed it at length in the past, and unfortunately, it did not materialize the way that we had hoped. So really, this is kind of off the table at this point in time. So it's not. I had hoped that this would be a solution that I could offer you as an option. That's not to be tonight. So. Really, the crux of this meeting tonight, city staff has taken this as far as we can go at this point in time. It is really now fully in the council's lap to direct city staff. What is it that you want us to do next? And there's some options here that I'll discuss in a little bit greater detail, but ultimately the city council can do or not do whatever you choose on this matter. The city staff has advised you. We've assembled information. We've attempted to negotiate, but it really does fall back to the city council now. So I came with some very simple possibilities. The council could ask the staff to draft an ordinance relating to adult entertainment in public spaces. That could be in either of those that we've talked about. And again, we'll get into more of that. You could do nothing. As I said, the petition is not a legal instrument. The council could elect to do nothing. You're under no obligation. There's obviously an intense interest in this, and that's a decision that you all would have to make. You could defer this discussion to a later date. I know there's been some discussion about seeing how things go at the next event to see if this is necessary. That's an option. The council could also direct staff to draft a resolution requesting that the state examine this issue. We'll talk more about that as well. And then there honestly is something that has not been contemplated, I'm sure, by me or by any of the other city staff that the council could request. But if the council wants this to go any farther, then we're just asking that you all have that discussion tonight and direct us in how you want us to proceed. Regulation, we've talked about this. There's really two ways to go, probably more than two ways, but these are the two most obvious that were addressed by Mr. Kane. content-neutral regulations. These have side effects. These could be reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. There's a lot you could do with these. However, what we have to be aware of is that anything you do with this will affect essentially all performances at the space. And they're content neutral. They don't care who it is, where it is, what it is. It's simply rules that everyone has to follow. So anything you do here will affect all performances in public spaces. Now, I will say this has a much lower legal risk than an obscenity ordinance that we'll talk about next. That obviously incurs a much higher level of legal risk, which is you all were informed by Mr. Kane. Obscenity regulation is the other way that we can go. Now, these can be specific. They can be targeted to a certain thing or an activity if that's what the council wants to do. That's the advantage of an obscenity ordinance. The disadvantage is that they do carry a much higher risk of legal challenge. And these legal challenges, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say they're extremely complex, Mr. King. Anything dealing with First Amendment, or in fact, there has been even a Sixth Amendment. Sixth Amendment, did I get that right? Equal protection. There's even been some cases dealing with equal protection. So any of those things we're dealing with constitutional law obviously get immediately complex. So that's just another thing to be aware of as we proceed. Other actions that the council could take, as I said, the council could do nothing or defer the discussion. There was no legal requirement put on you by the petition. It was simply an expression of the will of certain people in the city. And again, as you see here, there is definitely a will that something either be done or not be done. You could pass a resolution asking the state to examine this issue. Thought a lot about this. There are other states that have addressed this. There are very few cities that have. I'm not entirely certain that cities have adequate resources to do the right thing here, and I am concerned about that. So the state has much greater resources than we do. They have greater resources to study this, to regulate it, and then ultimately to defend whatever they choose to do. We are going to be much more limited than they are. One of the things that I think has troubled me, and you see it here, you see it in this room that's divided, is that there is no clear answer as to whether or not the activities that happened the night of the Pride event are harmful to anyone. You have opinions, very strong opinions from some people that it's absolutely harmful, but you have equally strong opinions from just as qualified individuals saying it didn't. So the council is being asked to weigh in on something that we're not used to weighing in on. Ask us about streets, ask us about bridges, ask us about policing, ask us about firefighting. We have the expertise. We can advise you as such. On this matter, we just don't have the expertise. So you really are being asked to go out on a limb here of something that is not a traditional local government matter. Again, it's the council's decision if you wish to do so, but I just wanted to present this as an option that the state could be asked to study this. They have the resources to look at it, to make a determination. Is this harmful? And if it is, they have the ability then to regulate it and defend it. So just an option for you all to consider. There's just a bullet point up there for other actions because you are not limited to this cafeteria list that you've been presented. The council can act in really any way which is lawful. But as I said, at the end of the day, it really is a council decision. And so all we're asking for tonight is for the council to have a discussion and provide direction to city staff as to how you'd like to proceed. We can have things ready for you perhaps at the February meeting, depending on what the request is, maybe later. So it really depends on what you all want. So I wanted to put this up here as a primer for this discussion, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you all have or just allow you all to lead this discussion however you'd like to go.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. That's a good overview. I think most of us are intensely aware, but it does help to jog memories and bring certain facts back to the top of mind. So council, having heard this discussion and being, I think, each of us quite aware of the intense interest in the community, what discussion, where do we go from here? What are your thoughts? Anyone?
Well, as Mr. Bailey said, I think that there was really good discussion amongst not just city staff, but council and other parties throughout the community, and I'm very thankful that everybody was very respectful and listening to one another to try to resolve this issue. But it does seem like we've kind of come to a loggerhead where we're not getting anything. I don't think we had hoped that the parties involved could have come up with a plan or a solution that would have benefited all of Bartlesville. but I don't know that that's where we're going to get to. At this point, I would motion, or like to motion, that we at least start looking at some sort of ordinance that would allow us to put language together that would get these type of events to what our citizenry think is community standards. And so I don't know that we have that yet, but and it could be something that's going to take time. So I don't know to put any kind of just immediate time stamp on it, but I do think that we can start working with Mr. Kane to come up with something that could be reviewed and obviously changed based on council's wishes.
And Trevor, if I could, just a point of clarity, I suppose it could be a motion, but really I think what Mr. Bailey's asking for is just the will or the feelings of the council as far as direction. Do we need a motion for that, Mr. Bailey?
It was left as an option on here if that was how council chose to proceed. But I would ask that if there is a motion of that nature and I say I would ask, I think Mr. Kane would like to have more detail as to what the council would like to see in that so that we can actually begin to work on this.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if my direction is going to be to draft an ordinance, it would be my advice to the council that I be authorized to engage the services of outside counsel with expertise in this area to assist me in that effort. So if the council were to adopt the motion that's been made by Mr. Dorsey, it would be my recommendation and my request that motion include an authorization for me to engage outside counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. So, Mr. Dorsey, if you do choose to make this as a motion, which you certainly may, I think one of the problems that I have struggled with, I suspect I can speak for all of us, if not, raise your hand. There have been a lot of very vigorous concerns and statements about why someone opposes or supports, and those are valid, and I don't discount that at all. There's been almost no input as to what might be done to address that. It's like, I don't like it, so do something. Well, do what? I don't know, but do something, which makes it increasingly difficult because none of us, except for Mr. Kane, holds a law degree. So we have a steep learning curve here, and we've worked on it very diligently. Mr. Dorsey, your thoughts on the shape of a motion, what might flesh that out? Would you be willing to include authorization to engage outside expertise?
Well, certainly that would be part of it because I know Mr. Kane has stated in previous meetings that this is not his forte, and I wouldn't expect for him to do this solo. So I would say that. And then I also think we kind of rushed him into the last discussion we had to have. I don't think we need to put some, again, urgent timestamp on it. I would think 90, 120 days, Jess, for council to have discussion with you on said ordinance and you to meet with other council.
I'll be honest, Councilman Dorsey, I've never done this before, so I have no idea how long it should take, and lawyers are not famous for how quickly they work. But I
looking like a true lawyer.
You don't get paid by the hour, do you?
Well, as our senior partner is fond of asking people when they ask how long is this going to take, he says, well, how long is a piece of string? It's as long as it's going to take. So I don't know, but certainly I think that the citizens of Bartlesville are entitled to some indication of where this is going, and so it would be, I would certainly move with all speed.
Before we make a motion, could some of the other counselors enter into the discussion?
Well, he has made a motion. It lacks a second at this point.
Yes,
so it's
it
somewhat
does.
in suspense. Mr. Dorsey, if you'd be willing to hold that aside and come back, is that agreeable? Yeah. Okay. So, council, what are your thoughts?
I would like to, well, first of all, I would just like to state, for me as Billy Roan counsel, My obligation is to the city of Bartlesville, the citizens of Bartlesville, and there are 3 things, and I even have them printed large so I never forget them. And it has to do with the health, the safety, and the general welfare of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And that is very important to me. And what I've seen happen to our community in the past 90 days has been very troubling. And it's been very disconcerting from all areas. So I would like us to think about, as Councilman Dorsey introduced an ordinance. We cannot go visit this every single time something happens. We've seen what, in my opinion, we've seen what has happened to our community in just the past 90 days. So the only thing is, I would like for us to consider a content-neutral ordinance that applies to every public space, not just one particular one, which means that all activities will fall under that content-neutral ordinance. For me personally, I believe that's one of the wisest things that we could do. That's not discriminating against anyone. We're looking at things across the board. And now, I am not a lawyer, so you notice I don't use all these fancy words that I did look up the definitions of, going through all the legal. But to me, that seems to be the fairest way to go about doing things. Now, how we go about doing content neutral, I think that Mr. Kane did a very good job in what he presented to us, and in his conclusion letting us know what that means. Those 3 different forms that have to be adhered to or paid attention to. That would be my first suggestion. I would hope that we would consider that. I hope that we would not consider an obscenity ordinance for this fact, for this reason. I looked at many, many things and many, many different cases that are public, including what Mr. Kane presented in his presentation to us. And that doesn't fare very well, because the definition of that is all over the place. And as a constitutionalist, I can see how you can stand on this side, and I can see how you can stand on this side. So that would be my only other, as far as what our actions would be. I also would like to see this council have a resolution to go to our state legislature to do as many of the other states have done. I found 8 so far that have done that very thing as a resolution, so that this is not being handled city by city. Instead, our state is making a statement about what should be public, fair, and what should not. We do that with everything else, especially where our children are concerned. That's all that that was the other thing that I would like. I'd like for our state legislature to take a look at this as well. And there may already be something, that they have in the hopper, but I don't think so, because I'm pretty sure that would have been headline news. But that's it. Thank you for letting me make those comments, and that's my what I wanted to say about the ordinance.
Thank you. Well said.
Or the issue.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of discussion points here. I've talked to a lot of people about this issue on both sides of the issue, and it is important to our community that we get this right. Our community could be impacted in a very negative way if we misstep here. I tried to put myself in the position of, I know there's passion from people, there's values that people hold dear in their heart. And I tried to put myself into a position of, what would I do if I felt like something was occurring in my community that was contrary to the values that I held, that I had passion for? The closest thing I could come to is the fact that, if the KKK wanted to come down here and use the Unity Square to hold a rally, that will boil my blood. All of them will go to hell as far as I'm concerned. I would have passion. I would not want to see this in my community. I would have conversations with my children, my grandchildren. I'd probably tell them not to go anywhere near the place, because the only only reason for this is to spread division. And if people came to me and said, we got to stop this, we can't let this happen, I'd have to look at them and say, it boils my blood. I think they're going to go to hell. I think they have the wrong message, but they have every right to say it. They have every right to assemble. They have every right to say that, and they have every right to do it. And I would fight for that right. I'd hate it. It had caused me sleepless nights, so I understand where everybody's coming from in this room. I've only been on this job less than 30 days. I remember very distinctly that I took an oath less than 30 days ago, and one of the pieces of that oath was that I was going to uphold the Constitution. I carry that Constitution around. I have it in my briefcase all the time. I have it with me tonight. We have, and the city staff has done an amazing job. Our community has done an amazing job of having a healthy dialogue about this. And I think our community has an understanding of what the community wants, what the community expects, and what this community can be. Our city attorney has told us that this governing board does not get to say, according to law, what is obscene. That is only held for the community via a court and a jury. Our state has laws on the books. I think we need to move past this issue so we can move forward in Bartlesville, build a better community, come together, repair some wounds, heal, and celebrate what our community is and the values of our community that we set forth in our strategic plan. I would recommend that this council take no further action on this issue.
Anyone else?
Mayor, I'd like to give kind of my overview. I think Mike did a great job of recapping what the city staff did. I was certainly involved in several conversations with OKEQ representatives, and I had a great positive feeling from those conversations. And I'm proud of the community and the process that we undertook to even get to this point. We didn't shut doors. We didn't slam doors in people's faces. We didn't heighten the rhetoric. We said, let's all sit down and take a breath and see what we could come up with. And I'm proud of the good faith efforts on both sides of the table. I respect Jess, and Mike did a wonderful job. If OKEQ representatives were on point, we had direct conversations. And as far as when we left the conversations, the negotiation between the city and OKEQ did not break down. They did not deteriorate. We were still anticipating perhaps more discussions further down the road. But with the withdrawal of the petitioner representative, that's where kind of the linchpin that things broke down at that point. So I'm proud of what the community's come to at this point. We've had a lot of impassioned speech, and I think we've grown better as a community, despite the fact that we certainly have a difference of opinion. And we've heard it on a religious side here. We've heard it on a constitutional side. Billy's made a great point. Lauren's made a great point about our conversation. So I think we've done a lot of work to get to this point, and I know we wish we had an agreement that we could move forward with. I certainly agree with Billy's idea of if we're going to do something, make it fair. And I like the idea of reviewing what the ordinance would look like without having to understand that we all have to vote for it or accept it, because we don't know what the ordinance would look like. We don't know how it would read. We don't know how it would be enforced. We don't know any of that. And I also like the idea that if we're going to take that step, then it's going to be easier to notify our state legislatures of what we're willing to do as a community to look at this. And if they have any support for that idea at the state legislature side, as we know there's several pending pieces of legislation out there in local states that are trying to deal with the same situation, then as we work down this road with a time frame for Jess to come up with an ordinance that we can review and consider, there may be other indications of what would be available to the council at that point. So I certainly support the idea of having the language presented to the council at some point. Content neutral is certainly seems like the way to go. And I would like then the idea that the community would understand we would be reviewing it with each councilor being able to vote an acceptance of it. Once we understood it, how it would be employed and enforced, I think that's a good way to go forward myself.
Well, thank you. Everyone has a lot of concern and a lot of thought. I think that perhaps one misunderstood issue is, was the council decided when they talked? The council has not talked except here before you, simply because that is the law. So we can talk to staff. Staff has talked to each of us, I believe, but we have not spoken with each other. So I cannot tell you what Ms. Roan or Mr. Dorsey or Mr. Rozelle or Vice Mayor Curd, because I have not spoken with them in compliance with state rules. But I think I begin to hear a common thread throughout their comments, and I think that comes from a lot of reflection, a lot of listening, and a lot of study. I also support the idea of asking the state to look at this. Totally different subject, but I'm reminded not too many years ago when the issue of what to do about masks for a health issue, and the same thing, lots of passion and concern. To do that on a community-by-community basis, it's a patchwork that is impossible to know when you go from Dewey to Bartlesville to Oshaleta. There's no uniformity, and this is not unlike that. It would be great if the state, as Mr. Bailey mentioned, would use their resources and their capacity to perhaps provide direction and understanding on a uniform statewide basis. So I think going to the state, just passing a resolution that would request them to look at this. I believe Tennessee, Texas, there are a number of states
Idaho, Missouri.
dealing with the same concern, perhaps with the same passion. So I think that would be one action this council could take to try and do that. Perhaps other communities would also. We're not the only community addressing these concerns, and having multiple cities ask the state might be beneficial in the long run to get that consistency statewide. If we look at either modifying or adopting a new ordinance, I think asking our legal department and giving them the resources that they need to accomplish that task, what could be done. And I think Mr. Bailey and Ms. Roan both have made a very good point. Content neutral will have unintended consequences. So when you affect A, someone in B's group will be impacted because their program in some respects will be impacted by those same rules. And that's as it should be in terms of fairness across the board. We don't know what those unintended consequences are, or else they wouldn't be unintended if we knew what they were, but we will learn as we go. So I think both of those are potential paths forward to help us get clarity and understanding, to, as has been mentioned, put this behind us and do what this city does well, deal with water and sewer and streets. Maybe we don't do streets as well as we ought to, but to deal with those issues that municipalities are designed to address. With that, council, this particular item is to have possible action. So, Mr. Dorsey, I will come back to you. I appreciate you being willing to set your motion to the side to allow this discussion. I think it's been very helpful. So I would come back to you and ask you for your thoughts.
Well, in my original motion, what I intended to do was give each council member the opportunity to work with Mr. Kane in order to craft that ordinance. Again, it would be my hope that we could come up with an ordinance that met the city standards for all of Bartlesville. So, and I don't know again how long that will take, and what resources Mr. Kane will need, but I would think that would need to be in the motion as well. And since he doesn't have a good time dial, I would say at least 120 days so that we're not pushing that issue to where he can't put something back in front of us for continued discussion like we've had tonight, and also allow him to engage other council in doing so.
Mr. Dorsey, if I may, I had made a note here to myself that your motion related to an ordinance regulating according to community standards. That would suggest to me an obscenity ordinance, but some of the other council members seem to be more interested in a content neutral regulation and maybe not so interested in obscenity. So I need direction on which
that's
option
again,
or am I pursuing both
fine.
options?
That's fine. I think, well, again, when we start to draft the ordinance, and it's not going to happen very quickly. So I think that gives all of us time to visit with you and give input, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
Yes, because
fair?
we definitely will need your input on how to put that together. And you can, if you would advise us in
So you can
content neutral ordinance.
You can retract any language, just that we would engage with you in order to put together some form of ordinance that we could review further as a council.
Content neutral ordinance, an ordinance based on content neutrality, or an ordinance based on prohibition of obscenity? Which am I?
No. And the reason he's making this distinction is they're going to be very different. They won't even resemble each other. And I know that-
Content neutral.
Content neutral would be an
Yeah.
ordinance, for instance, that says that there shall be no programs in public places after 10 o'clock. And that is going to be much less complicated than an ordinance prohibiting obscenities. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. What direction are you wanting me to go?
Yeah, that'll work.
So, content neutral options is
Yes,
what
sir.
you're looking for?
I would like some clarification on that. If it's strictly hour, dates, length of time, I don't believe that's the kind of ordinance that we need. I believe we need that, but to address the issues that are of concern, so I must misunderstood what a content neutral ordinance is.
I think that was just an example.
That's an example, and I would be, as part of this assignment, I would take it as my responsibility to provide you with a number of options, perhaps options that have been used successfully in other communities. But generally speaking, a content neutral regulation is going to apply to all programming in public parks the same way, whether that be decibel levels, like in the Rock Against Racism case that I discussed in my memorandum. That was a prohibition on programming that exceeded a certain decibel level. That applies to everybody. Another example would be all programs got to end at midnight. People ought to be sleeping after midnight. These are examples that I could bring to you for your consideration. But those are entirely different than an ordinance that says that we deem this type of activity as violative of the community standards in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, as we understand them, and we prohibit them because they are obscene. And so that's what I need your direction. Which ordinance do you want me to?
And that would bring the Miller test into the obscenity.
Well, that is some clarification quite a bit, because that is not how I'd understood content neutral. I thought, well, obviously I was misinformed and did not read this highlighted pink and purple all correctly. So I don't see how that would set any kind of a community standard other than those three things you said. So is that correct?
Community standards would not be a discussion with content neutral regulation.
Very good.
The
So-
decibel level has nothing to do on whether or not a particular activity is considered obscene in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, using the Miller test.
So, Jess, would you be able to create, would content neutral, however, if there was some specifications about no nudity, things of that nature, is that going to dip into that obscenity, or could you have no nudity, no, the certain body parts should always be covered, things of that nature? Are we dipping into obscene, or could you do that as it applies to all genders and all performances?
Well, nudity is already
Right, prohibited.
prohibited by state law and in our ordinances. If we want to strengthen those, tinker around the edges of the definition of that sort of thing, I'm fairly certain that we could do so without an outright prohibition on certain kind of obscenities. But I just have to dig into it more to tell you for sure.
So I guess we know what the concerns are from the council and from the public, and if there is a way to address those in a content-neutral manner, then obviously Mr. Kane is going to have his homework cut out for him, and he's the one best suited to research that.
Just if I can, sorry to interrupt you, Mike.
No, you're fine.
To remind the council, the reasonable time, place, manner, content-neutral restrictions are outlined in paragraph 3 of my memorandum. The specific Supreme Court precedent on that is, again, that Ward versus Rock Against Racism Supreme Court case, and it requires restrictions to satisfy a three-pronged test. The regulation must be content-neutral, must be narrowly tailored to serve a significant government interest, and it must leave open ample alternative channels for communicating the speaker's message. So are you wanting to proceed with that sort of regulation, or are you wanting to proceed with regulation banning this type of activity as obscene?
Well, my intent was to go back to the original discussion that had to do with adult-oriented entertainment in a public space, not specifically any but all adult entertainment. I'm not talking about one specific event at all or one specific organization. I'm talking about any adult-oriented entertainment in a public space.
So adult entertainment is that's not content neutral. So that would
No,
fail
that's
the
gonna
first
be,
prong of
Now I
the
understand.
Ward
Thank you very much.
Ward case.
I
So
understand now.
Yeah.
I apologize
No,
for
it's
not being
it's a
clear.
little dense.
For not being clear. So
Well, and I think-
I just didn't think about that being obscene. I know that I consider that adult. Now, if we consider all adult entertainment obscene, I would never think that. I mean, I don't, as I said, to me it's not this particular event that occurred on September the 10th. I think it has to do with any adult entertainment in our public spaces, period. And so, wherever that falls, then I suppose that's what, for me, that's what I would like to see us do, because, as I said, our grant of authority is based on health, safety, and general welfare. And I don't believe adult-oriented entertainment is in the best interests of our community. And I'm talking about in a public space. I'm not talking about what a private business does. There are other ordinances for that. I'm not talking about, I mean, I can think of several adult-oriented activities that would not be appropriate in a public space. And so that is, for me, that's my direction for us to take our community, because I think that's appropriate. I think that is the health and especially safety, and for our public welfare. And so those are my thoughts on that.
So,
So I apologize your clarification.
It would
Oh,
be community standards.
Chair, can I ask a clarification question? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Is Councilman Roan suggesting that we try to define adult entertainment?
Yes, I am suggesting that, and I believe that there is a definition for adult entertainment. I mean, yes, I know. No. I apologize, Councilman. I didn't
That's
mean to
okay.
smile
That's okay.
at
I'm
that.
just
I
I'm
didn't mean-
struggling
'cause I
with
think
that.
we do.
I'm struggling with that because, you know,
I do know.
I think there's some rock
understand.
songs that aren't appropriate for teenagers to listen to, but I wouldn't say they can't be played in public. I mean, I wouldn't want my 5-year-old child, you know, singing some stuff, and I would try to have a conversation with them about why they shouldn't be singing something. But we run afoul of free speech if we say that people can't stand in a public space and say it.
I agree with you as long as it confers with our health, safety, and general welfare. I do, Councilman.
Yeah, I think we're all aiming for the same thing on this city council. I mean, we
Well, I have observed that I had no one disagree that they believe that adult entertainment should not be managed appropriately. The difficulty is in defining exactly what that is.
yeah.
And therein lies the challenge that I'm not quite sure if even the courts have addressed with great clarity. Mr. Dorsey, I've tried to listen and think, what that motion might be, so I don't want to put any words into your mouth, but a motion to direct staff, a motion to provide staff with the resources needed to accomplish the goal, and the goal being perhaps more than one suggested result, one that was content neutral, one that attempted to deal with the issue of adult entertainment, and then finally, I suppose we could roll that into that, a resolution to supply to our state legislature. Would that need to be separate, do you believe?
Oh, I think you're just providing direction to staff,
Yeah.
so I think if you want to roll it all up
Does
together,
that-
you can.
Fairly,
Yes, well, I originally thought it was community standards, and then Billy made me think differently. I thought I was off track, but I think we're on the same page.
We are.
yeah, it's my understanding we cannot define community standards, but everybody uses it as a reference point. We don't have the ability. There is not a piece of paper that says community standards across the top, even though that's perhaps a guiding concept. That staff would bring back within 120 days various options for consideration.
Yes, again,
If
the
I-
initial was for Mr. Kane to be able to put something together where all the council members would be in discussion with him during that time period.
I think that's a
with his
given, yeah,
resources.
that we would work with staff, yeah.
If I could remind the council, just to help the discussion along, the Miller Court explained basic guidelines with regard to community standards is whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find the work taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law, and whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. That is the test for the constitutionality of an obscenity ordinance.
And clarify for me, does this governing body have the ability to define that?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, a trier of fact will ultimately decide, in the context of a lawsuit, whether that be a judge or jury, what the community standards of Bartlesville really are.
Okay.
But you have absolute authority to regulate in this area, so long as your regulation passes that test.
Okay.
Now, so with all of that discussion, if that motion fairly summarizes your intent, Mr. Dorsey, do we have a second?
I would second.
Can I have a point of procedure to reread the motion?
What about read? We'll try to restate.
Okay.
Okay. And Mr. Dorsey, again, correct me, that we provide City Council with both the resources
Time.
to accomplish the task and a task to develop potential actions for this council related to both content neutral and to adult entertainment and to potential resolution to our state legislature within 120 days.
Correct.
Is that
Correct.
a fair restatement? Okay. So we have a motion by Councilmember Dorsey. Mr. Owen, I'm going to give that to Vice Mayor Curd because he's closer to me and I heard him.